The Racial Justice Task Force is composed of a judge, a police officer, a public defender, which we have 4 fabulous public defenders here today, a prosecutor, and a community activist. And the idea is that the task force would examine the disparate racial impact of the criminal justice system in their particular community, and then identify one particular area of the justice system they want to work on, because the problem isn't just one thing, it's contributed to throughout the system. And so today you're going to hear about 4 different approaches that are being taken in 4 different areas of the criminal justice system.
We're going to look at how public defenders in Duluth, Minnesota, and Delaware, and Brooklyn, New York, and Louisiana, and New Orleans in particular, are working on these task force groups that Jack Hanna just described to you, consisting of their criminal justice counterparts, how they're working on achieving or addressing racial disparities. And so the challenge for this task force is a 2-year project. Year 1, the task force was supposed to identify some specific disparity in their criminal justice system with the police, the prosecution, with the court, with probation, parole, and then they would try to figure out what happened, what was the severity of the problem, and collect the data. We finished year 1, we've started year 2, and year 2 they're to implement a reform to address or eliminate that disparity. So you're going to hear from each of these jurisdictions about what racial disparity they found and what they're doing about it.
Hi, I'm Fred Friedman. I'm the Chief Public Defender in most northern Minnesota. I'm also a professor at the University of Minnesota. This is my 39th year. And the first time I went to NLADA convention was 1973 at the Hotel del Coronado in San Diego.
You were 5 at the time.
Yeah. My name is Brendan O'Neill. I'm the public defender for the state of Delaware. I came to public defense relatively late in my career. Started out in the LA County DA's office, then in the U.S. Attorney's office. Went into private practice, was a drug lawyer on the West Coast for a number of years. And I fulfilled a promise I had made to my then fiance, now wife, that someday we'd move back to Delaware, her home state. And when I returned there, 17 years out of school, I had to take the bar exam with the kids right out of school. They don't have an attorney's bar. So I made a deal that with my wife, I'll take it one time. If I pass, we'll have a decision to make. If I fail, I get to stay in my old life. So half hoping to fail, of course, ensured my success. I passed the bar, moved to Delaware, and went to work in the PD's office. And a few years ago, the governor appointed me as the PD. And that's what I'm doing now.
Good stuff. My name is Lisa Schreibersdorf. I'm the director of Brooklyn Defender Services. Our office, there are many offices in New York City that provide indigent defense services. Our office does about half the cases in Brooklyn, which is, what I don't know, the percentage of all the cases in New York City. Just to, I myself am very involved in NLADA. I'm on the Defender Policy Group. And also I'm a member of the American Council of Chief Defenders, which is, all the chiefs from around the state. It's kind of actually a really exciting thing to be a part of. Just to get a sense of the numbers, because all of us come from really kind of different jurisdictions. In Brooklyn, just in Brooklyn, there's 100,000 arrests a year. So my office does about 38,000 of those. And we're just like a smaller office compared to like Legal Aid, which does a lot more. So.
Good afternoon, defenders. I'm Michael Bradley. I'm the Deputy Chief Defender at Orleans Public Defenders. OPD is the sole defender for indigent people charged with criminal offenses in New Orleans. I got to OPD in 2008, but I've been a defender my whole career. I caught the bug first in law school, working in a criminal justice clinic. My first job out of law school was at the Defender Association of Philadelphia. Then I moved on to the Bronx Defenders in the year 2000. After that, I had I was serving as a full-time judicial clerk for a criminal court judge in the Bronx, so I got to see my former colleagues come before the judge all the time. It was great. That motion's denied, man. Why you bring this to me? But then after that momentary lapse of sanity, I came back to public defense, where I belong, moved to New Orleans, and I'm here now. So thank you very much.
I also was a public defender. I still think I am a public defender. After practicing for years at the DC Public Defender Service, I served as a director for a few years before moving on to law school. I'm curious, how many of you in the room are public defenders? Well, then we're at home. Okay. So we're going to talk to you guys, like public defenders, about the problems you see on the ground in terms of racial disparities in the justice system, and one approach that we're taking. So putting all these lawyers in advocacy mode. Let's just say that there is a $250,000 federal grant that only one of your jurisdictions can get. And this grant would allow you to do whatever is necessary in your jurisdiction to address racial disparities in your criminal justice system. All 4 of you are finalists, only one of you can get it. I want you to give your best argument, and the audience is going to vote at the end on who gets the grant. You know, what's good at having a hypo if you don't get somebody to win? I want you to tell me why you believe, based upon the work you've done with the Racial Justice Project and what's going on in your jurisdiction, why you believe your jurisdiction should get it.
So, what you wanted to say is, so do we have problems? Absolutely. Do we have issues of discrimination? Yes. Our number one group of color, far and away, is Native America. Of course. But if you want to be in comparison, I don't think public defenders should be in the business of screwing our brothers and sisters. Michael, take the money.
Hey. Okay, now can you tell me why the people from Duluth are not going to fire you as a public defender because you gave up $250,000? Could you make your best argument?
Because I've been around longer than them, and most of the judges used to work for me. My job is not at risk. And judges don't hire or fire us. Judges have no say in Minnesota, unlike many of you people out here. We are 100% independent from the judiciary.
Okay, so can you tell us about your racial justice?
Sure, but you said...
I know, but give your best argument.
You have it.
You just do it anyway.
The program that we did, we decided in Minnesota when we brought everybody together, including law enforcement, corrections, prosecution, the bench, we thought that our number one problem that resulted in racial disparity was far and away pre-trial release numbers based on color. And remember, this is only Fred saying this. This is the bench and law enforcement saying this, and corrections. When you move out west, the counties become much, much, much larger. One of my 4 counties, one of my counties is St. Louis County. St. Louis County is 193 miles long from one end to the other. It's from Lake Superior to Canada. My most famous constituent is Bob Dylan. So we found that if you're white, you get out. We have multiple courthouses, and we have courthouses that are 90 miles from the nearest jail. Think what I just said. Courthouses that are 90 miles from the next jail. And that's hard for NLADA to remember, where everything ends at the Potomac or the Hudson or the East River. So we're trying to find ways of making this, whether it's intentional or inadvertent, less of a problem. We concluded we have to be far more aggressive in terms of pretrial release. Now, some people support us because it's the right thing to do. Some people support us because no judge wants to look Grandma in the eye and take her house away because her grandson didn't show up. In other words, bail forfeiture. All right? A third reason that we get support from some quarters is people just naturally don't like bondsmen. And a fourth reason that we get support is just frankly money. The cost of pretrial detention for people presumed innocent is gigantic. Now, in just our judicial district, we will spend this year in pre-trial detention of jails that are remote because our jail is full. In pre-trial detention outside of our district, we will spend $1.7 million. How many public defenders does that hire? How many third grade teachers does that hire? How many people in the schools to combat bullying will that hire? What can you do with that in terms of public health if you don't want to give it to public defenders? So we have people supporting us for a variety of reasons. We've been very successful in having the right judge on the committee, who for 35 years was an ex-prosecutor. He's changed his mind, saw the Lord, and said this is what to do. So we're well on our way, for a variety of reasons, vastly reducing. Now what this means is that fewer people will be in color. The joke is in Duluth, if you want to see people of color other than Native, go to the jail. The reason it matters so much to Native Americans is, unlike some other groups of color, Native folks are rural. They live on reservations, in some cases hours from the courthouse. So it's up to me to argue that the only reason you should put bail on somebody is likelihood not to appear or going to offend. Other than that, my position is they should be out. And if there is bail, it should be low. It infuriates Native American groups when somebody says, or a judge says, I'm making you post bail because you live a long way from the courthouse. Why should bail be less, or not, or no bail, just out? And our state constitution says everybody gets bail. Everybody. Murder, everybody. Why should bail be less if you're 4 blocks from the courthouse or 40 miles from the courthouse? The only thing is, are you going to show and are you going to offend? So we've made a lot of progress through a lot of groups appealing to very different reasons. And what do I care what their motive is, as long as I get people out?
Okay. Delaware's jurisdiction sounds completely opposite to the northern region of Minnesota in that our statewide population is less or fewer than 900,000 people, and that's 3 counties. Our northern county is Newcastle County. It's kind of a distant suburb of Philadelphia, really. And then our southern 2 counties are Dover and Georgetown, which are really rural counties, but for the resort area at Rehoboth Beach in our southernmost county. And you know, you can drive the length of Delaware in under 2 hours, so it's a completely different deal than what Fred is dealing with in Minnesota, but we have some similar problems. And what we looked at was we kind of ignored the sort of glaring disproportionate minority representation in the criminal justice system and went for a very specific target. And what we did is the same kind of a task force where we have judges, we have prosecutors, we have defense attorneys, but we also have all the major police forces. We have the probation department on board, and that's part of the Department of Correction in our state. And what we try to focus on, which areas in our state do the players in the system have the greatest amount of discretion? And because it's our view was that the unfettered exercise of discretion is more likely to lead to some racially disparate results than some other areas where you have to follow certain guidelines where it's closer to a paint-by-the-numbers analysis. And what we landed on was the circumstances in which a probation officer writes a report to the court to trigger a violation of probation hearing for that probationer. And in Delaware, 23% of the people in custody are there awaiting a probation violation hearing or have been sentenced following a violation of probation hearing. So that's a big number. It's almost a quarter of our incarcerated population are there because they're awaiting a VOP, violation of probation hearing, or they've been found in violation of their probation. So we took a look at it and we found a racial disparity there. Wasn't as glaring as we feared, but we were so far into the project, we stayed with that. And there is a racial disparity, and what we're trying to do to correct it is, we've been down here to DC, and through Cynthia's assistance, we had a session with the DC Community Services Office, which is their version of the probation department. And through them, we've sort of stolen some of their good ideas, and what we're developing is a program to have an evidence-based probation system for every person who's sentenced to probation. They'll have a risk assessment done before sentencing. The judge will take that risk assessment, decide what level probation, what conditions to be imposed. And the probation office now, that's the sort of the working tool for each probationer. What's his risk assessment? We plug that into that person's electronic file, and then if that person is suspected of violating, the probation officer punches that in and he gets a range of sanctions that he can impose at his discretion. And that range of sanctions obviously has limits. if that PO wants to go beyond what the program suggests he does, he can do that, but he's got to speak to his supervisor before he imposes a sanction greater than the range of sanctions that this computer program is going to give him. And right now, it's in the planning stages. We're working on getting a risk assessment, and our difficulty has been really getting the Department of Correction, the probation department, to fully buy into it. They have a pretty big department. We have a lot of people on probation. And they want to kind of do it their way, and they're not quite fully on board with us yet, and we're still working with them. And what we're finding is they're fine with the risk assessment, but they don't necessarily want to be limited by the range of sanctions that this program is going to suggest. And the idea is we used evidence-based practices, get all the stats to determine, all right, in these kinds of cases, what is the risk of a reoffender? What can we do to try to keep them in line? What's worked in the past? And in a systemic way, that kind of makes sense. But from a lawyer's perspective, representing the individual client before the court, I don't care what the system says. I want my guy here to get a good result and get back on the street. And this risk assessment talks about 1,000 other people in similar circumstances. Well, as his lawyer, I ain't talking about 1,000 other people. I'm talking about this guy here. And one of the concerns that we have going forward as defense lawyers is, you get a system like this, and the bureaucrats say that's the system. You paint by the numbers. If you do this risk assessment, your score's a 7, your range of options are very limited. You cannot get anything different than that. So that's a concern that we have going forward, and we think with proper maintenance, proper implementation of this, and what the POs, the Department of Probation is going to promise to do as part of this program, they want to get away from what I call the gotcha probation violation model, where you step out of line, the PO's dragging you in, and you're facing a violation hearing, to what they call motivational counseling or motivational interviewing, where they enable the probationer to earn his way out of probation by meeting certain milestones rather than just finishing out his term till the expiration of the sentence that the judge has imposed. So we're underway with that. We're fairly confident it's going to get our clients better results. And I think as practicing lawyers, we're going to like it better now, because now our lawyers go into a violation of probation hearing for, say, 3 or 4 clients on a given calendar. What's going to happen to them now is kind of a crapshoot. It depends on what the judge's mood is. It depends on how the probation officer comes across. It depends on a lot of things that we really can't pin down. So moving to a more evidence-based program, we think we're going to get greater predictability for our clients, which is a good thing, and we can better advise our clients, and we hope to get some uniformity across the board in our different counties and our different judges. The other fear, the fear is, what we don't want to do is what they did with the federal sentencing guidelines. Make all the harsh sentencers the uniform sentence. That's the default position. We don't want to do that. We still want to have the opportunity to get our people out.
Fantastic. In Brooklyn, our prosecutor is Charles Hines, and he's extremely open to looking at issues that are really difficult for most prosecutors, I think, to look at. And because of that, we have a lot of drug courts and mental health courts, and all that stuff has been going on for years and years and years. So, look, in Brooklyn, I'll just tell a little story. I think I told this at one of our meetings. We get a lot of visitors to our courts, of course, because we're in New York, and there was a group from Japan that came to our court, and they came to our criminal court, and they walked in, and they saw everything, asked a lot of questions and everything like that, and then at the very end they go, okay, can we go to the court for the white people now? So that's how profound the racial disparity is in Brooklyn. I can tell you that it is literally, if there's one, it's under 5% of people who are arrested in Brooklyn are not of color, let's just say, not either Hispanic or black for the most part. And it is so offensive, you can't get away from it, okay? But it's also a really hot button issue, and it's a very difficult thing to address inner city racist police policies, which is really what's going on. That's how it starts. So I got to give it to our prosecutor, who came up with something that he thought would be a little bit more politically easy to swallow, and if we were able to establish a racial disparity, there'd be no way to get away from it. So I really went into a gung-ho because I thought it was kind of brilliant, and I was really amazed that our prosecutor was willing to take the initiative, and that means a lot, I think, in terms of getting change. So what they did was they decided to look at DWI cases. And the reason for that was because we know that drunk driving is something that happens across racial groups. And is it limited, because of course the answer always is, well, you know, if you look at the description of who commits the robberies, you know, you see a disproportionate amount of black people or Hispanic people doing robberies, so that's why more people like that get arrested. And that's always the answer. So we wanted to find something that that answer would not work. That may be true, but there are a lot of reasons for that, and we didn't want to get into that. So with DWI, we knew that there's drunk driving everywhere, and in fact, I would guess just because the population of Brooklyn is more white than not, probably more white people drunk driving. So we decided to look at all the DWI cases over the course of an entire year and see if we could find racial disparities, and our idea was to be open to see where the disparity kicks in. We fully expected, we all of us expected, that the disparity would show up at the police level, where they choose to set up their checkpoint. And we still really believe that that's true, but we were not able to establish that purely by the data. We did a lot of data collection, very scientific. We felt the most important thing to get any change was to really have the data, and we really focused on that, and I think it was an important thing that we did it, but because of the way the population of Brooklyn is, it didn't work out. And the reason for that is because, we don't think it's working out, we're not fully done, but the reason for that is because there are pockets of, let's say, Caucasian, white neighborhoods where there is kind of a lot of DWI arrests, and there are certain ethnic populations that tend to have like a little more of that, and the cops do set up checkpoints there, which may not be racially motivated, but is like ethnically motivated. But it's a little harder to identify that in your data. So where we did see a disparity in sentencing. We did find that people, especially Hispanic people, but black and Hispanic people tended to get jail more often than white people at the end of, at the end of the day, that was the biggest disparity. But the amount of jail that people get isn't very much, and there may be some other factors that are infiltrating that, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. So to talk about our project, I think I really just want to express, and maybe there'll be more time for that, but I really want to express that I think we could not get the police department to join in this project, even though it was being run by the prosecutors. And so we have a judge, we have myself, we have a prosecutor, but a very high-ranking prosecutor. We have a community activist, and we have a great group. And what I have found to be the most valuable thing, and I think you could take away from this, is the conversation started with, we all know there's racial disparity, and it went from there. To get to a little project or see what we could change probably would have a lot of meaning for a certain amount of people, but it would never have as much meaning as somebody very, very high up in a DA's office that prosecutes 100,000 people a year, 95,000 of whom are probably a person of color, and having that person sit down in a room full of people and say, yeah, I know there's racial disparity, and having the willingness and the desire to see if we can do something about it. I think in Brooklyn this is a long, long-term project, so I'll take my money after they get theirs, kind of done, and maybe in like a few years, I think we could do something that, and I honestly feel, I want to say that I think that this project, and if you want me to talk more about what happened in New York City recently, this project has created an environment within which we all feel like we can kind of go after police practices that we don't think are okay. And having that sort of joint desire has a huge amount of meaning, right? So I think it was a really valuable thing to do.
Dear federal funder, with all this money that you can spare $250,000 for this program, you've already heard 3 incredible pitches, 3 very worthy programs. I really think we should divide it by 4 because we can all use it. We all have our hearts behind our specific programs. We've all done a lot of hard work on it. And I know that federal funder, with all your money, your means and your benevolent spirit, you probably hear a lot of pitches all the time. You probably hear pitches all day long. So I'm not going to give you a pitch. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. right? What if you could snap your fingers and make a difference in the lives of hundreds, maybe even thousands of people? What if you could snap your fingers and break the seemingly endless cycle of addiction, poverty, crime, and incarceration? And what if you could snap your fingers and help somebody who never had a chance before, who felt they had nowhere else to turn, and ended up in the criminal justice system, not because they're a bad person or a mean or evil person, but because they didn't have any other options, and they had nowhere else to go. That's our goal, and that's what we're trying to do here in New Orleans through the Racial Justice Improvement Project. When we sat down as a group, and we do have a judge, a police representative, someone from the district attorney's office, myself and a colleague, and members of the community who are all part of the project. There's so much wrong in New Orleans right now. The criminal justice system is busted, is broken. We almost had an embarrassment of riches as to different things we wanted to try to address. There's just so much wrong. Fred only talked about a couple of them. Our DA has been in the Supreme Court twice this year on Brady violations, right? You pick up the New York Times today, and you'll see an article about the murder rate in New Orleans and what it's doing to our communities and doing to our children, right? We have the sheriff is the jailer in New Orleans, and he's being sued for substandard facilities. People not being able to see who they need to see, not being able to visit their loved ones, lawyers not being able to visit their clients, horrible, deplorable conditions, crimes happening inside the jail, people dying in the jail. Our judges have been accused of commingling court funds with their personal judicial expense funds. We have a traffic court who has held on to money and put it into their accounts instead of giving it to the people they're statutorily mandated to give it to, including our office. We've had to sue our judges. We've had to sue our bench, and consider what kind of a practice environment that creates. You can imagine. We had to sue our own bench in order to get proper disbursements through the Public Defender Act in the state of Louisiana to our public defender's office, right? So we had all those things that we tried to choose from. We were just like, I don't know. The other thing was that when you look at the demographics of New Orleans right now is, I think the latest census revealed 60.2% African American, and that's down after the storm, right? So it was higher than that before. You had at one point you had an African American mayor, an African American chief of police, an African American DA, an African American sheriff. You had a racially diverse bench in criminal district court. Out of 12 judges, 6 are African American and 6 are female. You had a racially diverse city council, and so the question for us was, when you have when the leadership of the city is predominantly African American, how does this produce a criminal justice system that is so racially oppressive in so many different ways? We still struggling to answer that one. We really have no idea. If you ask me personally, I would say that it's just decades of neglect and just corruption. People doing whatever they want to do, no oversight, nobody watching them, nobody trying to figure out what was wrong and why and what was causing the problems, and that's how it got to where it is today. We really wanted to be driven by data in our selection of our topic. We really wanted to figure out what the racial makeup was of people in the jail, who was getting sentenced to larger sentences, if there was a racial disparity there.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. I can go for days. And what we ended up, and basically we couldn't get any data because the sheriff, who's also the jailer, is in control of all of the data for the criminal justice system. Wasn't willing to give it up to anybody really. But what we found out coincidentally, because the sheriff wants to build a new jail, he had to let some numbers out there, right? And what we found out was that the length, once you hold constant for factors like criminal background, criminal history, charge, and financial status, the length of stay in jail in Orleans Parish Prison is 50% higher for African Americans than for other people. And why would that be? Why would it be 50% higher when you hold all those other factors constant? So what we decided was that the best thing we could do to eliminate that racial disparity that we could identify was to get people out of jail pre-trial, right? Reduce that length of stay by getting people out of jail. And the way we're trying to do that is through an enhancement of the current diversion program that's run by the DA's office. You know, the initial DA representative on our task force wasn't really willing to work with us. He was literally the DA's spokesman. That was his title at the DA's office. He said, no one's gonna mess around, and the DA's not gonna want anybody messing around with his program. That's his baby. You guys aren't gonna be able to change his mind or expand it or change the criteria. You know, and we just kind of went over his head, right? We went over his head. You know, with the help of Cynthia and guidance from the ABA, we were able to go over his head, talk to the assistant, the deputy DA, who was my counterpart at the DA's office, and the DA himself, talk to the director of the DA's diversion program and open that program up. You know, they gave numbers and data to Cynthia. You know, they used some of that technical assistance mojo, you know what I'm saying, got some more funds, analyzed statistically that program, and found out that there was no racial disparity in the way that program was administered. You know, we didn't want to take our clients out of the frying pan and into the fire, so to speak. You know, we had to make sure that program was doing things the right way. And so we're concentrating on opening that program up, you know, bringing it up to best practices and standards that are promulgated by the National Association of Pretrial Services Agencies, and just trying to get that program to help more people. And that's why New Orleans should share in the pool.
You are on a committee with people that are in some ways your natural adversaries, and in many cases not natural adversaries, but they become your adversaries: the police officer, the judge, the prosecutor. And so you're being asked to participate in a reform to improve your criminal justice system, but at the same time you represent a particular population of people, and that reform might not be the best thing for poor people. It may be the greatest thing for the criminal justice system, but those two roles might be in conflict from time to time. And while you're there trying to be collaborative and be helpful, you have to be mindful of the fact that you have to go back to your office, and the people there are going to say, you agreed to what? You know, why were you drinking the Kool-Aid at this meeting? So do you want to talk about some of the conflicts you've had being an advocate for poor and working on this group, working with this task force?
As we were going through, we looked at every single significant part of a case. We looked at how bail was set. We looked at where arrests were taking place, who was getting arrested, what bail was being set, what pleas people were being taken, how many went to trial, what the sentences were. We tried to find out where the disparity was, right? And when we couldn't really nail the police down in terms of the arrests, it started to look like whatever disparities were coming up might have been, I don't want to say coming out of the DA's office because I don't think that's really fair, but it really might have just been a combination of DA policies and enforcement of those policies. I think the DA policies are solid. They're equal across the board. But they divert from those policies in certain ways. And what happens is, I think that maybe white defendants, white clients of ours or private attorneys, get the benefit of a downward departure because everybody feels bad that they work and they have kids. And whereas I think that probably most of my clients may not get that benefit. So they might get the sort of standard plea, whatever was going to be gotten. And sometimes we're able to convince them to come out off of it. I think when you saw that, so what happened was then the DA's office became very defensive, which I think is pretty normal, right? They got very defensive about it. And what they kept doing was proposing solutions that would make sure that there was no departures from their policies, right? So now, all of a sudden, all the suggestions are, well, nobody, even the guy with 25 children and a sick mother and, first arrest and he has a job, nobody's going to be able to get better than the, 30 days or whatever, misdemeanor conviction, whatever it is that they wanted. And of course, that's not what I want. I want everybody to have the right, So that's a perfect example of all of a sudden now I'm in a different role. Because here we are joining together to try to see if I can identify these issues, and now I'm saying no. The other suggestion they had was, why don't we get a DWI court? We'll put all the cases together, and then we'll make sure nobody ever, departs from our standard plea offer. And I'm sure all of you know your prosecutors love that, right? Because they can get a much tighter handle on who works in those courts and stuff. So, and then they could also teach the judge not to depart from their offers. So I know that, and the only thing I can really say is, if you ever find yourself, I've been on a lot of drug court panels, mental health court panels, and this always happens. You're doing great, and all of a sudden, somebody puts up like a big wall because they want it to look fair and they want everything to be standardized, and I think he's touching on that in Delaware as well. And all of a sudden you go, I don't want that wall. The wall is never good for us. It's always to our benefit when we can make our clients human and get a departure from a policy. It's like the sentencing guidelines are horrible for that exact reason. So, to be honest, it's difficult, but you have to remember where you're coming from. I'll sit down at that, when that starts to come out, you have to have established yourself up to that point. You have to establish yourself as an equal participant in this committee and not feel like you're an outsider. You have an equal right to be there as a public defender. There are 5 people in this committee, I'm one of them. The community activist is often aligned with me. She doesn't understand it the way I do because she's not a lawyer. So the trick is, leading up to that, to align yourself with the people that might be more in your corner as you go along, and make them understand what your concerns are and how much you care about what's happening to your clients. And in the end, when you say, no, I don't agree to that, you kind of earn the right to veto power when you do that. When you've spent the whole time explaining your concerns, what you care about, what matters to you. This is one thing I could just say, and I think in general, it's surprising to public defenders, but the rest of the criminal justice system really respects us most when we're fighting for our clients. When we stand up for our clients, when we speak for them, when we say how much we're concerned that they're being treated fairly and equally and being given mercy and all that, when we consistently convey that message and not a different message, which, there's a lot of other messages we can give out, but that message, that resonates even with the people on the other side. And when you say, no, I don't think that's going to be fair to all the people, especially in a project like this, they go, all right, well, then we'll have to find something else. And that's all you want. You want to be able to not have to go back to your office and say, oh my God, now we're going to have a DWI court, I'm so sorry.
Cynthia asked how you can collaborate without selling out your clients. You're not doing the best thing. Most people in here, I assume, are public defender managers. So I guess my comment after almost 40 years is this. You're in 4 boxes. You're with your clients in court. You got to advocate for them. You got to advocate for the people that work for you and with you. You got to advocate and work with and collaborate with other people, as we love to say, we are co-managers of the criminal justice system. And fourthly, you got to be in the box in your community. Everybody in your community needs to know who you are, who the public defender is. I see a huge difference, Cynthia, between collaborating, which you need to do, or between collaboration and concessions. Collaborating is good. Conceding is not. Something the gentleman on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue might want to think about. Collaboration is good. Concession, not so much. The effective public defender is a person that finds new, pleasant, amicable ways to say no. And you can get what you want, make your point without personally insulting people. And that's my suggestion. Collaborate doesn't mean conceding.
Okay. Well, a couple other things for Michael and Brendan. Along the way, you guys, both of your jurisdictions have made a lot of progress, but you've encountered some bumps along the way. This hasn't all been, we sat down, we agreed to do diversion, probation revocation, bada bing, we got the data, and boom, we discovered the disparity, we were on the way. Can you tell the folks here who may be thinking about this kind of collaboration, some of the obstacles that your task force, we'll start with Michael and then we'll go to Brendan, that you encountered along the way and how you all worked through them? You don't have to tell them what I did. I mean, just the task force stuff. I didn't do anything illegal. I mean, it just.
No, and I blabbed too much during the pitch. I really kind of covered a little bit of this already. I think the main obstacle that we came up with was, the whole point of this group and this task force and coming together was to have an evidence-based judgment and response and a deliberate selection of a topic that you could actually do something about and fix, right? We have and continue to have enormous challenges in data collection. I stated before that all of the court data is basically warehoused by the sheriff, who is the jailer in New Orleans. He basically decides who gets access, who gets a password, what the level of access is, what you'll be able to see, what you cannot see. And it's a system that's basically was state of the art in 1970, right? I mean, if you look at this thing, you type on it, it's a black screen with the green writing. Some of y'all are too young to remember what that looks like, but I remember back in the day, that's what a computer was, and that's what we're working with. It's like, how can you try to get any kind of reliable data out of that thing from somebody who really doesn't want to give it to you, right? So we had enormous challenges trying to get data so that we can even identify our topic. And listen, I mean, we really knew. We knew from our clients and we knew from our community what the racial disparities were. I mean, we really did. We knew that the police were unfairly targeting the young black men in certain communities. We knew that. We didn't need a computer to tell us that, right? So that's one thing that's one thing we considered taking on. But of course, because there's so much attention in New Orleans right now, because there's a federal and national presence, there was the Department of Justice was already there doing an evaluation, and they were about to be under a consent decree, right? So we're like, all right, can't do that one. Can't tackle police practices and stop and frisk, even though we know what's wrong and we know they're doing something wrong, and that it is and that there's really a racial disparity there. So data collection was the main hurdle. We also had our RDA representative I also talked about before. When we started thinking about diversity, just when we started thinking about it, like somebody said, and he's like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. We're running a good program here. We don't want anybody messing with that. And there was a lot of hesitation. It's kind of like similar to what Lisa was saying. I mean, when you're going to pick on somebody's program, they're going to get defensive. They're going to kind of shut down and close up. And we just had to say, look, I mean, it's a good program. You're telling us that it's successful, that it's working, that you were doing things that are benefiting mostly my clients, right? So why not open it up, take a look at it, and see if we can expand it, take it a little further, even help more people. You get better statistics and you get to brag about your program, right? We're going to make sure the thing succeeds because you're picking the right people, and so you get to then ask the city for more money to run this program, even though participants have to pay. But I think kind of navigating those two huge hurdles were really difficult, and it's still a little bit of a process, right? I think we have them to the point now where the program is opened up, and we are trying to institute little pilots to try to see if we can, relax some of the admission requirements and sort of try to decrease the length of the program that you have to go through. I think that approach and that strategy has worked after really some initial bumps that are really tough to get over.
Right. Well, I'll echo some things that Fred said and that Michael said, and I agree with Fred that we're co-managers of the criminal justice system, and the way I described it in several ways is, one, for the system, we want justice. But for our clients, we want results. And they're not necessarily the same thing. A generically fair system is good for the whole population of clients generally. But for my individual client, I don't give a shit about pardon my French, about the big system. I want him out the door that day at that hearing. And they're not necessarily always in sync. But the fairer the system, the more just the structure, the better the procedural safeguards, the greater chance you're going to have to walk your client out the door that day. So they do overlap, but we come back in our practice in the PD's office, we want this client out the door today. And building a fairer overall system is going to help us get there more frequently. So that's very similar to Fred's assertion of collaborate but don't concede. And similar to what Michael said, working in this kind of a deal, we have to overcome some institutional biases. And they include, you know, something that is probably not unique to Delaware, but in Delaware they always refer to the Delaware way. That we always get along, we always work out things in a bipartisan fashion. And, you know, underlying that is the next conclusion is, because we do it the Delaware way, we're doing it right. And, you know, and I moved there from another jurisdiction, Los Angeles, which sometimes got it way better, sometimes way worse. But Delaware has this vision of itself that they're better than everyone else. And you know, when you're inbred in that, you don't really realize. Delaware always touts itself as having the greatest judiciary in the nation. And they got judges that are good, they got judges that are bad, they got judges in the middle. They're like anywhere else, but they think they're great. And, you know, you sort of have to overcome that part of it. Other institutional biases are, you know, keeping people in jail or putting people in jail is sort of the default position of law enforcement and the criminal justice system, in the you know, under the guise of public safety. You know, we got to put people in because they're a risk to people out in the community, and that kind of is the default position in a lot of the you know, the checkpoints in the criminal justice system. And, you know, in Delaware, it's, you know, the tradition is if someone's on probation, they've been given a privilege, they've been given an opportunity. If they violate that opportunity or they don't take advantage of it and they do something that they're not supposed to do while on probation, they go to jail, and they deserve to go to jail because they, you know, they blew their chance. We've given them a second chance and they didn't take advantage of it. But, you know, what we try to say, you know, hey, it's unrealistic. These people have never made a good decision in their lifetime. Their history of bad decisions is what got them on probation in the first instance. You cannot expect them to immediately turn into Boy Scouts when you put them back on probation. There has to be some tolerance to allow these people to get through their probation rather than whacking them every time they step out of line. And so there's some institutional bias. And in Delaware, there has been a bad tradition of sort of doing a life sentence on the installment plan, where you get violated on your probation, they reimpose, you know, another 2 years probation after another 30 days, and until all that back jail time has been exhausted by 30 days, 60-day sentences followed by another year on probation, they keep doing that. And there's some movement afoot, and we've made some progress in getting judges not to do that. And there's another thing that I don't think is, you know, generic or unique to Delaware, that I think happens a lot of times when lawyers are involved with judges in policy decisions. Because in the courtroom, it's appropriate that the judge always has the last say. I mean, that's what the judge is there for, to make a decision. And our job is to persuade the judge to make the best decision, the decisions that best for our clients. But what happens is, when they come to these collaborative settings, the judges come in with that same thing, that they're going to have the last word. And the participants in the event also kind of defer to the judges. And you know, I use the expression, you know, it sort of queers the deal. And I did that because when we were last down here, we had a Supreme Court justice who's in our group. He's sort of the de facto chair. And I told him, you know, this is a problem here because you don't have all the answers. And he said, well, you really shouldn't refer to it as queering the deal. You should probably say changing the dynamic. So I'm going with that. But I think, you know, it does. You got to be wary of, you know, they think they know everything. And not, but they don't know everything. And their viewpoint isn't necessarily the one. So from our viewpoint, or at least mine, these are some of the problems that we had to address, you know. And the other thing was the data. You know, how do we define, you know, success on probation? How do we, you know, measure certain things? And in the PD's office, we have pretty good data for our own stuff, but not in the specific with respect to violations of probation, because we're reactive. The probation officer institutes it, it goes directly to court, and then we match up a lawyer who goes to court on that Wednesday and handles the 5 or 6 people on that judge's calendar that are facing violation of probation hearings. So we're not part of the process that institutes the whole thing. We're showing up for a violation hearing, and most of them get resolved by plea, some get set for hearings, some get, you know, dumped, but the data collection was in the hands of someone else, and they haven't been overtly resistant, but we had to go some distance to get them to cooperate, and I think we're getting there.
Okay. So I'll get to you in just one second. Let me just do, one of the things that this project does is it provides money, right? Not a lot of money, but each jurisdiction gets a total of $24,000. They get $12,000 for the first year, $12,000 for the second year. Each jurisdiction had to apply for this grant and in the application process say there are racial disparities in my system and get a letter of support from all of the various entities in the criminal justice system. So you couldn't get the grant and then the DA back out or the public defender say I don't want to be involved. Everybody had to agree before they could even qualify. So after getting all of the groups together and setting this up, what we've discovered is it's actually a pretty good forum for bringing about change, even though there are problems along the way and it's not perfect, but it is actually a good mechanism for bringing the competing interests together and all of the policymakers, even having the public defender there saying, okay, you can't do it that way. You're right, that's a good thing to do, but not in that way. So if other jurisdictions, because one of the things that the ABA hopes to do is expand this project to other jurisdictions and really use the work in these 4 jurisdictions as the model for how we go forward. If other jurisdictions would be interested in this, what are some of the lessons learned? We've talked, you don't have to repeat the ones we've talked about along the way. What advice would you give to other public defenders who are saying, you know, the prosecutor, the judge, they've come to me and said they want to start a racial justice task force. I know you guys had one. What would you advise them in either setting up a task force or that public defender, because in New Orleans, the public defender applied for the grant, and either applying for the grant or how to proceed with the work. Starting with Fred, and we'll just go straight there.
In one sentence, get a criminology or social statistician. Get a statistics person.
I would say target something that's manageable. You know, you're not going to change the whole system overnight in a project that's, you know, has a 2-year shelf life to give you some insight into your own system and how you might change it. Find something discrete, focus on that, and really repair one of the, you know, if your house is full of leaks, repair them one at a time. Just pick the leak, fix that leak, and then go on to the next one. But I think keep the project discrete.
I would agree with those things, and then I would say, and find one, if you're going to start with one, find one that's the least, like what they did in New Orleans. Don't start with the one that is going to really trigger the most resentment or fear or defensiveness. Start with something kind of mild, like, you know, oh, we have this diversion program, we could be using it more, versus let's go after the policy of stopping, you know, young people of color on the streets. Because it's the same thing. Like, once you get your foot in the door that we can solve a problem, and I found this in the drug court sphere. We started with one drug court, and then we grew the specialty courts, and now to the point that our mental health court, I mean, they'll literally take they've taken people that push people in front of subways and all kinds of really harsh things, because you develop whatever, a working relationship and a level of trust of your process. So that's what I would say. Pick something really easy for the first one.
You know, keep an open mind and don't get discouraged. I cannot tell you how many times we met in the very beginning. You know, we got frustrated, we couldn't find something that we could agree on. You know, we kept our minds open, we kept working on it. It's going to take some time. You're not going to have the perfect thing right off the bat. What you start off on might not be where you end up. And, you know, just keep the lines of communication and have a real working collaboration, and just create an environment where people are able to really share what they really think, you know, and like we've been saying, you know, don't concede. You have to continue to be an advocate because you have a job to do and you have your client's interests to protect. But just go into it with the knowledge that you're going to have to roll your sleeves up and just get to work. You know, one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Edison, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, but he said something like, I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 things that do not work, right? If you go into it with that kind of an attitude, you know, and yeah, they're your adversaries, you know. I'm going to fight with you over emotion tomorrow, but today we can sit and talk about this thing that's going to benefit the criminal justice system as a whole.